This webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on our YouTube page, hopefully by the end of the day or at least early tomorrow. That'll be posted at our YouTube page again. That's youtube.com/Chicago BACP. Just type that into the chat. We already have Friday's webinar. We offered this exact same webinar this past Friday. That webinar is already posted on our YouTube page. So if you miss anything or want to share it with colleagues, please check out this webinar at our YouTube page. Additionally, a big portion of today's webinar is going to be asking and answering questions. Please use the chat for questions. I'm typing into the chat right now, so if you have any questions, please submit them via the chat. Additionally, I may not be able to answer every question just because some things would necessitate that I consult with some colleagues. Some things may require some nuance that I would need to look up and make sure that I'm giving the correct answers. If that's the case, or if I don't get to your questions during the course of this webinar, please send them via email to bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. Again, that's bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. And then just type that into the chat as well. And I promise me or someone from my team will respond to those questions as soon as possible. So without further ado, we'll get started. Again, today's webinar is about navigating Chicago's new COVID-19 regulations. These regulations were announced just this past Thursday. And they were due to, we were able to make this announcement. We were able to announce loosening of regulations due to some positives that we've been seeing recently in all the COVID-19 metrics. So there are 4 different metrics that our health department is using to determine Chicago's ability to move forward in reopening and to really understand how we're doing with the COVID-19 pandemic. And over the last 2 to 3 weeks, we've seen some really good signs. As you guys know, prior to that, we saw cases going up in diagnosed cases, test positivity, emergency department visits, and ICU beds occupied by COVID patients. We've seen all 4 of these metrics either go down or at least hold steady over the last 2 or 3 weeks. That's a really, really good sign. We're also seeing more and more people get the vaccine, and therefore we're seeing a lot fewer kind of serious outcomes from COVID. So while we're not out of the woods yet, as you can see here, we're not fully in lower risk, and we're certainly not fully in controlled transmission, but we've really seen some very, very good signs over the last couple weeks. So thanks to all of you for all you've been doing to help keep our entire community safe. So because the numbers had started to go up a few weeks ago, we had held off on making any additional changes. But since then, since the numbers have either gotten better or been holding steady, we were able to make this announcement last week. So high-level overview of the announcement that was made on Thursday. So due to 2 weeks of stable or declining metrics, effective immediately as of last Thursday, we expanded capacity across industries. And I'm going to talk about what that means in just a second. Additionally, and really importantly, we also announced that with 2 more weeks of the stable or declining metrics, we will broadly loosen even more regulations and go to what we're calling and aligning with the state on a Chicago bridge phase. In order to do that, we need to also meet the state imposed criteria, but we're really happy that in potentially as soon as 2 weeks, we could enter the Chicago bridge phase. And I'm going to talk about what that means in just a minute. As a reminder, while we are increasing capacity, while we have increased capacity across industries, 6 feet of social distancing and mask requirements remain in place, as do a variety of other regulations that I will talk about in more detail today. So first, what I'm going to do, and again, I ask, please feel free to submit questions. What I'm first going to do is provide an overview of the new regulations that came into effect this past Thursday. Then I'm going to talk about the bridge phase, and then I'm going to talk about these regulations in more detail before answering it up for questions. Before opening it up, I apologize for questions. First, for bars and restaurants, you could see here's an overview of phase 4 with the changes that were effective this past Thursday highlighted in red. So bars and restaurants can now operate indoors at the lesser of 50% or 100 people. Before we were capped at 50, we're now increasing to 100 people. Outdoor service is still permitted without capacity restrictions, and outdoor service is really strongly encouraged. We know that outdoor, even into the future, even as more and more people are vaccinated, outdoor is always a safer option. And that's why it's still 10 people per outdoor table and 6 people per indoor table. Those table size limits remain in place, as do the closure hour of 1 a.m. That is still remaining in place for now. 4 people per party at the bar or counter, and tables must be spaced so that patrons are 6 feet apart from patrons at other tables. All of those other regulations remain in place. I'll go into this in a little bit more detail in just a couple slides. Social events, weddings, for example. There's no changes immediately to the capacity limit under the COVID regulations, capped at 50% or 50 people indoors, and outdoor events capped at 50% or 100 people. All of those bar, food service, and bar regulations that I just covered must be followed. But importantly, fully vaccinated individuals are now fully exempt from capacity limits. This is a change that is effective just this past week. I promise I'll go into it in more detail in just a couple slides. And it only at this point applies to social events. We hope to roll it out to other industries soon, but for now, it only applies to social events such as weddings. Fully vaccinated means 14 days after the final dose, and it only applies to private events, again, such as weddings, with guests RSVPing ahead of time. It cannot be events that are open to the public, and it cannot be events where people are, arriving at the door. They need to RSVP ahead of time. So again, that fully vaccinated individuals are exempt, and I'll go into this in just a little bit more detail. Commercial and residential buildings and hotels, in as much as they're, following and, acting as a hotel or a commercial or residential building, all the existing regulations remain in place. That's 50% or 50 people per space. With these events, if you are having an event at a hotel, for example, it needs to follow all of the social event regulations. No immediate changes for recreation, 50% or 50 people indoors. Outdoors, groups are max of 50 people, multiple groups permitted. Meetings, conferences, conventions, things like that. Small events that are small venues that have 200 or fewer capacity are limited to 50% or 50 people, while larger venues greater than 200 capacity limited to 25% or 250 people. And again, I'll talk about all this in a little bit more detail in just 1 minute. Museums capacity remains in place, 25% indoors or outdoors. Personal service and retail stores still limited to 50%. Performance venues, movie theaters, and ticketed spectator events, that's a big change here. Any indoor or outdoor venue that has less than 200 capacity are limited to the lesser of 50% or 50 people. But any indoor or outdoor venue that's greater than 200 capacity can now operate at 25%. So this applies, the big news last week was the United Center. This applies to the United Center. Other, large theaters can now operate at 25%. No changes for health and fitness, 50% indoor capacity, 50 people per indoor group class, 100 people per outdoor group class. Festivals, general admission, spectator events, flea and farmer markets have a new capacity. This is we're actually aligning entirely for these events with the state. So these guidelines are exactly what the state regulations are. Finally, places of worship, small places of worship are still limited to 50% capacity with no more than 50 people. But large indoor venues, ones that typically hold 200 or more people, can now operate at 25% capacity. Outdoor venues do not have a capacity cap, provided that there's 6 feet between parties. So this is an overview of what is in place right now. But as I said, Thursday's announcement was not just about the current regulations. It was also about the regulations that we hope to reach as soon as 2 weeks after that announcement, which means as soon as May 13th, provided that our metrics continue to decline or at least remain stable, and we meet the criteria met by the state, we will move into the Chicago Bridge phase. And this, as you can see here, is a wide loosening of regulations across different industries. We will also consider expanding the vaccine exemption to other industries such as bars and restaurants, meetings, places of worship, places like that, once we get into the next phase. So Chicago Bridge phase, which again can happen as soon as May 13th, provided that our metrics are stable and we meet the criteria met by the state, which means at least 70% of residents 65 or older vaccinated across the state, and stable or declining metrics across the statewide metrics as well. If that happens, again, as soon as May 13th, potentially, indoor service at bars or restaurants will increase to 75%. Table size, both indoor and outdoor, will increase to 10 per table. We'll expand operating hours to the normal liquor license operating hours, which means closing by 2 a.m. most nights and 3 a.m. on Saturday nights, still without the late hour operation. We would then allow 6 people per party at the bar or counter. And for the first time, we'd allow standing areas at 25% capacity. Social events would vastly increase, up to 250 people indoors and 500 people outdoors. Capacity at commercial and residential buildings and hotels will increase to 60%, while events, again, are limited to 250. Again, this is if we reach the Chicago Bridge phase. Recreation can increase to 50% or 100 people indoors. Meetings can now get up to 1,000 people and under 60% capacity. 60% capacity at museums, personal services, retail stores, performance venues, movie theaters, and ticketed spectator events can be up to 60% capacity, and health and fitness centers. Festivals, general admission, outdoor spectator events, flea and farmers markets can also increase to align with the state now. Indoor venues, places of worship can increase to 60% capacity. Again, that's what's happening at the bridge phase. I see a couple questions come in. What I'm going to do now is provide a detailed overview of what the current regulations look like for bars and restaurants and for social events, and then we will, and then I'll open it up for questions that are coming in. So for restaurants and bars, the current phase 4 regulations, again, these are the regulations that are in place right now. Indoor service is permitted at the lesser of 100 people or 50% capacity, with 6 people per table indoors and 10 people per table outdoors. Food must be available at all times. Want to kind of provide a little bit more clarity on this. This should not be a heavy burden. If you're a bar, a tavern, a brewery, a lounge, a place like that that does not serve food, all you need to do is make sure that food is available. You don't need to have a formal partnership, but it can be as simple as saying, hey, you can order from the pizza place down the road. They'll deliver, or you can go pick it up and bring it in. It can also be as simple as, posting a sign that says, hey, feel free to get delivery from Uber Eats, Grubhub, any place like that. Here's our address, and you can eat it here. The important thing is that food is available. It does not need to be a heavy lift, though. Bar seating is allowed, but you need 6 feet of social distancing between parties at the bar and no more than 4 people per party. Fully enclosed tents are considered outdoors. Again, fully enclosed tents are considered outdoors. This is the case for events, bars and restaurants, anything like that. If you have a tent that has all the walls closed, then it's outdoors. Then it's considered indoors. If you have a tent that has at least 50% of its sides open, then it is considered outdoors, and you must follow the outdoor rules. Again, outdoor service is permitted without max capacity limits, and it is much preferred. Everything we know about this virus is that it is much preferred to be outdoors. What do we mean by outdoors? Sidewalk cafes, outdoor patios, expanded outdoor dining areas, rooftops and retractable roofs. Again, outdoor tents as long as they have 50% of their sides open, igloos and other one-party structures, and also indoor spaces, indoor tables that are within 8 feet of a wall that is at least 50% open. That is considered outdoors, and you can have 10 people per table and it would not count towards your indoor capacity limits of 50% or 100 people. A couple more details on bars and restaurants. Face coverings must be worn in all indoor or outdoor public settings, except when seated and actively eating or drinking. So as many of you know, the CDC has relaxed its guidelines for face coverings outdoors. However, when you are within an establishment, even in their outdoor settings, you can only take the face covering off when you're seated and actively eating or drinking. So any other time, whether you're indoors or outdoors and in kind of a common area of an establishment, you need to have the face coverings on. Tables must be spaced so that patrons are 6 feet apart. A question here that came in about ordering from the bar or counter. You can now order from the bar or counter only if patrons are not seated at that bar or counter. You cannot have patrons walk up right next to other guests and order. So if you have folks sitting at the bar, then there's no ordering from the bar. If you do not have folks sitting at the bar, then you can have patrons ordering from them. Or if you have people sitting at one portion of the bar and you have a place where people go and order that's 6 feet away from those patrons, that's okay. The important thing is to not have people go up to the bar and stand within 6 feet of patrons that are seated at the bar. At this point, patrons still must be seated when eating or drinking. Again, standing areas will open under the bridge phase, but at this point, still must be seated while eating or drinking. Events can occur, must follow all of these regulations. Reservations are encouraged, so is a 2-hour time limit, but it is not required. Indoor recreation, pool, darts, things like that can be allowed, but face coverings must be worn at all times, and you cannot be eating or drinking while taking part in recreation activities. So face coverings on when playing darts. If you want to then go back to your seat and drink, that's okay, but you can't be kind of standing up and eating or drinking while playing darts, for example. Patrons must be off site by 1 a.m. and pickup or delivery of food can continue at all licensed hours. Okay. I'm going to now talk a little bit about social events, including that vaccine exemption, before opening it up for a couple questions that are coming through. So social events, again, are allowed at the lesser of 50% or 50 people indoors, and outdoor social events are limited to the lesser of 50% or 100 people. As a reminder, when we say outdoors, if you're under a tent that is that has all its sides open, or at least 50% of its sides open, that is considered outdoors, and you can operate at the lesser of 50% or 100 people. However, all dining regulations must be followed at social events. That means no more than 6 people at tables indoors and no more than 10 people at tables outdoors. Still must be seated when eating or drinking. Again, this will relax when we get to the bridge phase, but for now, that's still the rule. And I saw a question about this. Tables must be spaced so that patrons are 6 feet away from patrons at other tables. It's not just that the tables are 6 feet away, the actual guests must be 6 feet away from other guests. And again, face coverings must be worn at all times, except when seated and actively eating or drinking. And at this time, dance floors must still be closed, along with all other places where social distancing is not possible. This is a statewide regulation at this point, and as you know, we cannot be less strict than the state here in the city of Chicago. So, as I said, fully vaccinated individuals do not count towards COVID capacity limits if the following criteria is met. Guests must be at least 14 days removed from their final vaccine dose. That means the first dose of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine or the second dose of either the Moderna or the Pfizer vaccine. It must be at least 14 days removed. Guests must RSVP prior to the event, and events cannot be open to the public. Events also must take place at a licensed business, and they must be at a designated event venue. That means it cannot be an event that takes place at a regular restaurant space, for example. A restaurant cannot rent out its regular, typical restaurant space and then use this vaccine exemption. It must be an event venue space that's always used for event venues and was not designed and designated as an event venue space. Now, the licensee is responsible for ensuring that exempted guests are vaccinated, and they must keep records that include first name, last name, date of final vaccination dose, and some sort of attestation that the individual is fully vaccinated. You do not, as the establishment, you do not need to maintain copies of a vaccination card or any other sort of records other than a simple list of the name, first and last name, date of vaccination dose to make sure it is at least 2 weeks, 2 weeks prior, and an attestation that the individual is fully vaccinated. So when we say licensee, ultimately, when we're, as BACP, it's ultimately the event venue that is responsible. Now, we imagine that the venue will have some sort of relationship, some sort of contract with an event organizer, with the client, and the person who is actually holding the records does not need to be the venue itself. But ultimately, it is the licensee that is responsible. The venue itself is ultimately responsible. Again, they can delegate that when if we happen to conduct an investigation. It doesn't need to be the venue licensee that is there keeping the records, but ultimately it is the responsibility of the venue licensee to count towards that. And I want to clarify something on this. We're really excited about rolling this out for social events, and we hope to roll it out to other establishments soon. But I just want to make it clear that the guidelines for exempting individuals are subject to change. This is a new thing. A lot of different cities around the country are figuring it out. We hope that, we anticipate that there may be changes in these regulations, and we'll make sure to communicate those if there are any changes. Great. I'm going to quickly, I see a couple questions come in. I'm going to quickly provide an overview of the venue capacity and regulations at performance venues, movie theaters, and ticketed spectator events, because this is a big change here. Indoor and outdoor venues, small ones that are under 200 capacity, are limited to the lesser of 50% or 50 people. Indoor or outdoor venues that are greater than or equal to 200 capacity, follow 25% capacity limits without a maximum cap. However, parties still must be spaced so that they are at least 6 feet from other parties. So it may be the case that you cannot reach 25% capacity within your venue because you need to make sure that patrons are 6 feet apart. If eating or drinking is happening, you must make sure that all the food service and bar regulations that I just covered are being followed, meaning no more than 6 people indoors, 10 people outdoors, patrons seated when eating or drinking, and face coverings worn at all times, except when actively eating or drinking. Before moving on to a couple other important updates for businesses, I'm going to take a minute to answer the questions that have come through. Great. I got a question here specifically about some business licensing questions about if they need an FEIN for your LLC. If you send that question to us via email, I'm admittedly not the business licensing expert, but I'll make sure to connect you with someone who is. Again, please send that question to bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. I had a question here. Do the vaccine requirements apply to meetings or conferences or only social events? As a reminder, they only apply to social events at this time. Our intention here is that, you know, we wanted to make sure to try it out at limited areas first before rolling it out to other industries. And weddings currently are limited to only 50 people indoors, so we wanted to provide an opportunity to get above 50 people. As a reminder, indoor meetings at larger venues can go up to 250 people at that 25% capacity. For a wedding in a tented venue, if our capacity is 100 people, how many people can we allow? So again, capacity is limited to 50%. So if you're typically at 100 people, you would now be limited to 50% of that, which is 50 people, whether that is indoors or outdoors. On the capacity chart for commercial buildings, where it says 50% or 50 people, is it the lesser of the two? Yes. Whenever you see 50% or 50 people or 50% or 100 people, that always means the lesser of the two, the lesser of 50% or 50 people within commercial building spaces. But to clarify on commercial buildings, that means the lesser of 50% capacity or 50 people within any one kind of common area. That does not mean your entire office floor needs to have no more than 50 people. It means if you have kind of an open office space, let's say, that can have no more than 50% or 50 people within any kind of common area. I think I said this since the question came in, but just as a reminder, for indoor social weddings, you can understand that you have 6 people per table. Do those 6 chairs need to be 6 feet apart or just 6 feet apart from the next table? That's a great question. For indoor social weddings or for restaurants or for performance venues, any of these other places, the 6 chairs in one table, those chairs do not need to be 6 feet apart. So that party of 6 or fewer at a table, those folks can all be within 6 feet of each other. Just needs to be 6 feet apart from the next table. Great question here. I had a question here about outdoor pools at residential apartments and condos. At this point, all pools are limited to no more than 50% capacity. That's the health and fitness guidelines. Face coverings can be removed when you're in a pool, but try to encourage folks to stay 6 feet apart from different parties. Great question here. What about live music performances at outdoor restaurants? Now, I can speak to the COVID rules. I know that there are specific regulations around when and how outdoor performances are allowed. I'm not an expert on those, but if you send us an email to bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org, I'll get you an answer there. So I don't want to say anything that is not allowed. But typically when we're talking about live music performances, restaurants, bars, places like that, under the COVID regulations, you can have live music. Live performers can have their face coverings off. They need to be 10 feet away from any guests. So because face coverings are off, because there's projections while singing or playing an instrument, the distance is a little bit further. So you can have live music under the COVID rules, but you must be 10 feet away from guests. And that's the same rule for performance venues, places like that, must be 10 feet away. Again, though, there are specific rules about when and how outdoor performances are allowed. So please send us an email and I'll get you more clarity on that question. I had a question here if I could restate the mask policy for health and fitness centers. Yes, health and fitness centers, masks must still be worn at all indoor health and fitness center, whether you're classes, whether you're working out by yourself. Masks must be worn at all times indoors. The only times they can be removed are outdoors if you have 6 feet of social distancing. Great question here about the vax exemption. If somebody lies about their vaccine exemption, can the licensee be held liable for that? So at the end of the day, it is the licensee's responsibility to check vaccine cards or to do some other way to verify that folks have or truly have the vaccine, are fully vaccinated. Now, what we will be checking, if we check, and let me be clear, we're not proactively visiting weddings. The last thing we want to do is show up at a wedding as business compliance investigators. But if we receive complaints, if we're made aware of event venues that are clearly breaking the rules, that is something that we may have to investigate. What we're looking for is hey, we show up at a place, there's 150 people there. We want a list of 100 people that are vaccinated with their date of vaccination, and and some, like a checkbox, something saying that they are that the venue has done their due diligence to make sure. Now, again, that's the main thing we're looking for. It is your responsibility, really, as the licensee, to make sure that these are viable. Okay. I got a question here about office workers. When can office workers return to work in their offices subject to the 50% capacity limit? They're absolutely permitted to return now. Many offices have been open throughout. The 50% capacity limit, again, as I said, applies specifically to common areas within offices. Great question here. Just as a reminder, if 50% of a wall can be opened via window or a door in an event space, and in a restaurant, does that 8-foot rule apply as it does in restaurants? Yes. If you have tables that are within 8 feet of a wall that is at least 50% open, that counts as outdoors and does not count towards your 50% capacity indoors. Great. I'm just scrolling through. How are backstage capacities being determined at outdoor performance venues? Backstage, really across the board, you'll see this 50% capacity. Backstage areas are also limited to 50% capacity, and face coverings should be worn while backstage. Sorry. Great. Great question here. Will dance floors still be banned in the bridge phase? Again, we're looking to our colleagues over at the state. At this point, we've heard no indication from the state that they would be opening up dance floors in the bridge phase, but we will be following, the guidance from the state there. Great. I see a couple additional questions come in. I'll get to those in just one second. I wanted to provide a couple important updates separate from the reopening regulations. First, we are in vaccine phase 2. For the first time, the vaccine is widely available. All Chicagoans age 16 plus are eligible, and appointments are widely available. If you haven't made one already, if you haven't made sure your employees have made their appointments already, please, please, please do so. I can't stress it enough. The only way that we're really going to open up fully is when enough people are vaccinated. So chicago.gov/vaccine finder, number of different sites are open for walk-ins, drive-throughs, all that. And we have 312-746-4835. You can usually get in touch with someone right away, get you an appointment right away. At this point, there's no, for months and months, it was hard to get an appointment. That's not the case anymore. And again, the only way that we're going to really, really loosen all of these is if we get enough Chicagoans vaccinated. So I can't stress this enough. Related to this, a new law that just was passed a couple of weeks ago here in Chicago is the Vaccine Anti-Retaliation Ordinance. The intention of this law is to make sure that it's easy for workers to take the time they need to get vaccinated. So what does this law mean? Again, this is in effect in Chicago. It means an employer cannot require a worker to be vaccinated during off-shift hours. So an employer must allow their workers to receive the vaccine during work hours if they so choose. And they cannot retaliate against the worker for taking time off to get the vaccine. So if a worker wants to get the vaccine during work hours, employers must let them, and they cannot retaliate against them for doing so. Additionally, they must let their worker use accrued paid sick time to get the vaccine if they have it for that purpose. Finally, if an employer requires their worker to get vaccinated, which some businesses are requiring their employees to get vaccinated, If that's the case, then you must compensate your workers for that time up to 4 hours per dose if the vaccine is made during the shift. Finally, before answering a couple additional questions, I want to make sure everybody is fully aware of a variety of different available funding for all small businesses, particularly venues, restaurants, bars, places like that. First, the Shared Venue Operators Grant is open for grants. Application opened, I believe, just last week or maybe 2 weeks ago. You can apply through the Small Business Administration's application portal. Visit sba.gov/SVOG for more info. Additionally, the Restaurant Revitalization Fund just opened for applications today. I believe it opened at just 11 today. You can apply through a portal on the sba.gov/restaurants website. You can also apply through point of sale applications that you use with your business to help restaurants. And it says restaurants, but it's also bars, breweries, other establishments like that. We're going to hold a webinar with the Illinois District of the SBA tomorrow at 11 a.m. You can visit our main webinar page to register for that. Please, this is we've been saying this entire time that, we need federal funding to make our restaurants and other venues whole that have been impacted by COVID. We're really glad that the administration has finally stepped up. And we want to make sure all of Chicago's restaurants, bars, other members of the hospitality industry have access to this. So again, webinar tomorrow at 11 a.m. Feel free to send us an email. We do not administer the program, but I'm happy to help you get as many answers as possible on this program. So feel free to send us an email. Finally, if you have not done so yet, Paycheck Protection Program, sba.gov/PPP. Applications are open until May 31st for this program. Great. I'm going to now answer a couple additional questions. Are temperature checks required for outdoor pools and other spaces like that? No, temperature checks are not absolutely required. It's recommended if you can. At minimum, for most establishments, you need to post some sort of sign upon the entry to tell anybody that's coming in that hey, they can't do this if they're feeling sick, if they have a fever, if they have a cough, anything like that. But temperature checks are not requirements. Do you have the vaccine for folks that are homebound and cannot leave their homes? Absolutely. I'll put back up this page. Call 312-746-4835. The Chicago Fire Department is working with the health department to get vaccines to homebound individuals. We're certainly not the ones that are running that, but I'm happy if you want to send us an email, I'm happy to get you more information like that. Are outdoor pools required to have an attendant, or can you just have someone during certain times? So pools are not required to have an attendant. However, it is your responsibility as I'm not sure if you're talking about a residential building, hotel, place like that. If you can't be sure that the regulations are being followed, then you should have an attendant there to make sure. But if you can have signage, things like that, at the end of the day, it's your responsibility to make sure that these rules are being followed. Great. Having some people that have kind of some specific method of questions about keeping track of vaccinated individuals. We have some more details on our website. Happy to if you visit chicago.gov/reopening. You can get some more information here. The state also has a really good FAQ that can provide some more details on how to keep track of vaccinated individuals. Please feel free to send us an email at BACP Outreach, and I'll help get you those answers. Great. I see a couple additional questions come in. I'm going to stick around for just a little bit. Please feel free to stick around, send us an email to BACP Outreach. Hope to have some more of these trainings in the next couple of weeks as we continue to broadly loosen capacity restrictions. We're definitely moving in the right direction and really hopeful. But again, please make sure you're getting vaccinated, make sure your employees are getting vaccinated. It's the only way we're going to really broadly open up. Thank you everyone for joining.